The conference room door clicked shut in front of me, and a burst of rapid-fire French erupted from inside. Then came a silence so complete it felt like the air itself had been vacuumed out of the hallway. I stood in the corridor with my cleaning cart, still clutching the damp rag I just wrung out. I wasn't supposed to be on this floor at all. The housekeeping supervisor's schedule was crystal clear. The 15th floor international conference room had an international client reception today, and all cleaning had to be finished by 9 in the morning. But Lucy from administration had called facilities 10 minutes ago, saying someone had spilled coffee all over the carpet in the VIP lounge next to the conference room. The foreign delegation was arriving in 40 minutes, and it had to be handled immediately. The reason this task landed on me was simple. I had the least seniority. The old hands in facilities all knew that the VIP area during an international reception was a minefield. Do it well and you get 0 credit, screw it up and you're out the door. They'd passed the buck around until it landed on me, the woman who'd been on the job for less than 3 months. I didn't complain. The most important lesson I'd learned in those 3 months was that a janitor's status in this building ranked somewhere just above the carpet in the elevators. The quieter you were, the more invisible, the safer you stayed. So I'd knelt in the VIP lounge, spent 20 minutes scrubbing that coffee stain clean, and used a hairdryer to get the carpet about 80% dry. I was just about to pack up and leave when I noticed the sudden silence coming from the conference room next door. That silence was wrong. My simultaneous interpretation training told me that a normal meeting has a natural rhythm, continuous flow, brief pauses between speech and translation. But those pauses are fluid, like breathing. This pause was different. It was like someone's breath had been cut off mid-inhale. Strangling in their throat, a low male voice asked something in English, and the irritation in his tone was unmistakable. No one answered him. I straightened up and peered through the half-open door of the VIP lounge. At the end of the corridor, the double doors to the conference room were shut tight. 2 security officers in black suits stood outside, their faces grim. One of them pressed his earpiece and muttered something, his brow furrowed so deeply it looked like it could crush a fly. "Where's the interpreter? Where's the French interpreter?" Rapid footsteps echoed from the other end of the hallway. A woman in stiletto heels was practically sprinting toward us, her ID badge slapping against her chest with every step. I recognized her, Mina Fang, the director of administration. She was one of the few people in this building who actually made eye contact with janitors. Though eye contact was about as far as it went. "She wouldn't remember your name." Yvonne suddenly lost her voice. The security officer said in a low voice, "Something's wrong with her throat. She was fine a minute ago." And then, nothing. "She can't make a sound." Mina's face went white. She took a deep breath, and her voice came out low and barely controlled, crackling with panic. "Are you kidding me? The entire Falex group board is in there. They flew all the way here for a cross-border Manda deal, facilitated at the highest government level, and you're telling me the interpreter just lost her voice? What about the backup? Today's French team only had Yvonne scheduled, the other 2, one called in sick, and the other went with the CEO to the Chicago branch. How long to pull someone from another language team? The nearest is Japanese on the 9th floor, but they don't speak French. English team has people. But Falex explicitly requested French communication. It's written into the reception plan." Mina's fingernails dug into her palm. She turned, her gaze sweeping the corridor like she was searching for any possible lifeline. Her eyes passed over my cleaning cart, lingered on me for less than half a second, and moved on. Of course they moved on. I was wearing the navy blue janitorial uniform, my sleeves still damp from the coffee stain I just cleaned up. My hair was tucked under a disposable hairnet. My feet were in canvas slip-ons whose original color was anyone's guess. Standing in this gleaming marble corridor, my very existence was a mismatch, an error in the building's polished design. Another burst of French came from the conference room. This time the volume was higher, and the tone had shifted from mere displeasure to something colder and harder, the voice of a man who felt insulted. The speaker had switched to French entirely, speaking rapidly, like he was demanding answers. "I heard every word," he said. "I am confused. If your company cannot even guarantee basic language communication, then what is the point of our meeting today?" He delivered the sentence like a knife, elegant, unhurried, slicing through everyone's nerves. Mina couldn't understand French, but she understood tone. Her face went from white to ashen, and her fingers began to tremble. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and when the call connected, her voice was shaking. "Mr. Cole, we have a translation emergency." Yvonne suddenly lost her voice, "and there's no backup French interpreter on site." She didn't get to finish. The conference room door swung open from the inside. A Man stepped out. The first thought that crossed my mind when I saw him was, so this is what Adrian Cole actually looks like. In 3 months at this building, I'd heard more rumors about him than about any celebrity. The founder and CEO of Cole Industries, 40 years old, he'd built a traditional manufacturing company into a business empire spanning real estate, technology, and finance in just 6 years. Financial magazines called him cold-blooded, decisive, never wrong, the water cooler. Gossip was more direct. When Mr. Cole walks through this floor, you'd better breathe quietly. One sweep of those eyes, and he knows exactly what you're worth. Right now, those eyes were fixed on Mina Fang. There was no anger in them, not even any obvious emotion, but Mina's hand froze mid-air, holding the phone like she'd been hit with a paralysis spell. How long until this is resolved? Adrian asked. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a nail driven into the floor. I'll pull someone from outside. The fastest would be 40 minutes, 40 minutes, he repeated the words, his tone flat, but Mina's face went another shade paler. Director Fang, do you know how long the chairman of Falex's board flew from Paris? 7 hours, and you want him to wait 40 minutes? Mina's lips trembled. No words came out from inside the conference room. The Frenchman's voice sounded again. This time, what he said made my fingers involuntarily tighten. He said, if someone who can speak French does not appear before me within 10 minutes. I will consider this a sign of disrespect from Cole Industries toward Falex Group. I take my leave. He wasn't threatening. His tone was calm, like he was stating a fact, but that calm was the most dangerous thing of all, because it meant he'd already made his decision. He was just waiting for formal confirmation. Adrian clearly understood. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only physical sign of his rapid thinking. His gaze swept the corridor again, slower and more deliberate this time, like he was inventorying every resource at his disposal. Then his eyes landed on me more precisely. They landed on my cleaning cart first, then moved to my face. I instinctively wanted to look down, but I stopped myself. The other lesson I'd learned in these 3 months, the harder you try to become invisible, the more likely you are to be noticed. The best way to hide is to be natural, to stand there like a real janitor would, doing what a janitor does. So I just stood quietly beside my cart, still holding that damp rag, and met his gaze with a blank expression. He looked away faster than I expected. His attention on me lasted less than 2 seconds. His focus returned to Mina, and he was about to say something when a commotion erupted from the other end of the corridor, coming through. Move. A man in a janitorial uniform was pushing a waste collection cart twice the size of mine, barreling around the corner at full speed. He was clearly in a hurry, moving too fast, and when he turned, the cart scraped against the wall paneling with a screech that set everyone's teeth on edge. Even Adrian flinched slightly, his brow furrowing. The janitor panicked. He fumbled to steady the cart, but overcorrected, and the whole thing tipped sideways. The overflowing pile of discarded documents and shredded paper cascaded out like a paper rainstorm, blanketing half the corridor. A few scraps drifted all the way to the conference room door, landing right next to Adrian's black leather shoes, brandless, but clearly worth more than my monthly salary. Mina sucked in a sharp breath, her expression shifting from panic to despair. The janitor's face went white, and he stammered, I'm sorry, over and over, scrambling to pick up the paper scraps. But the more he scrambled, the worse it got. The cart's wheels had jammed between the wall and a trash bin, and no matter how he yanked, it wouldn't budge. It just kept flinging more shredded paper everywhere. Adrian didn't look at the janitor. He didn't look at the paper on the floor. His gaze stepped over the mess and landed on me again. This look was different from before. The first time had been a scan, an inventory, a calculation. This time, there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. It looked like confusion or recognition. I felt a primal prickle of danger. When a CEO looks at a janitor like that, there are only 2 possibilities. Either he's recognized something he shouldn't have, or he's seen something he shouldn't have seen. Neither option was good for me. I dropped my gaze and took half a step back, preparing to push my cart and leave. I'd finished the VIP lounge carpet. There was no reason for me to stay. The translation crisis in the conference room, the garbage in the hallway, and Adrian Cole's watchful eyes, none of it had anything to do with me. I was just a janitor. But just as I turned, I heard the scrape of a chair being pushed back inside the conference room. The Frenchman's footsteps moved toward the door, clear, rhythmic, each step landing on everyone's heart. He was leaving. If the chairman of the board of Falex Group truly walked out that door, today's partnership would be completely ruined, and the chain reaction that would follow, the government's introduction becoming a joke, Cole Industries losing face in the international business community, Mina Fang probably getting fired on the spot, and those 2 French interpreters who called in sick not escaping blame. Either what did any of that have to do with me? But the Frenchman's words suddenly echoed through my mind again. If a person who can speak French does not appear before me within 10 minutes, I will consider this a sign of disrespect from coal industries toward Falex Group. I knew why he had said that. Falex was a family business, built over 4 generations. What they valued most wasn't profit, wasn't terms, it was respect. The French prize that word above almost everything else, especially in business settings. You respect their language, and you respect their culture, their history, everything they cherish as a family legacy passed down through 4 generations. If he truly stormed out today, the damage wouldn't stop at coal industry's reputation. It would also destroy the trust that could have been built between the 2 companies, and that trust could affect thousands of jobs down the line, and an entire supply chain. What did any of that have to do with me? I had only arrived in this city 3 months ago. I didn't know a single person. I didn't have a proper job. I was scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins for $3,200 a month. I couldn't even figure out my own life. What right did I have to worry about the livelihoods of thousands? But I heard my own voice ring out, not loud, but clear enough that every single person in the corridor heard it. Monsieur, permettez-moi de vous répondre, sir. Please allow me to answer your question. Mina Fang whipped her head around, her mouth forming an exaggerated O. The security officer's walkie-talkie nearly slipped from his hand. The janitor crouched on the floor picking up paper scraps looked up, his expression as if he'd just seen a ghost, and Adrian Cole, he had no exaggerated reaction at all. He simply tilted his head slightly, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, the corner of his mouth twitching almost imperceptibly. The footsteps in the conference room, the ones heading toward the door, stopped. Silence hung in the air for about 3 seconds, then the Frenchman's voice rang out again, this time carrying a note of surprise and curiosity. Qui parle? Who is speaking? I set down my rag, walked around the cleaning cart, and headed toward the conference room door. Mina instinctively reached out to stop me, her eyes filled with panic and uncertainty. I knew what she was afraid of, a janitor daring to speak French on her own initiative. If she said something wrong, if she offended the foreign guests, the consequences would be 10 times worse than the interpreter losing her voice. But her fingers withdrew before touching my sleeve, because Adrian Cole gave her a slight shake of his head. That gesture was small, but I saw it. I walked to the conference room door and, facing the half-open door, delivered a complete and standard greeting in French. Sir, I am an employee of Coal Industries. Please forgive the earlier oversight. If you have any questions, I can answer them for you right now. The door was pushed fully open. A silver-haired French gentleman stood inside, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit with a dark red silk handkerchief folded in his breast pocket. His gaze was sharp and appraising as he looked me up and down, his eyes pausing briefly on my janitorial uniform before returning to my face. You say you are an employee of Coal Industries? He asked in French, his tone carrying undisguised skepticism. Yes, sir, a cleaning lady who happens to speak French. I met his gaze. Without flinching, without offering any unnecessary explanation, he stared at me for a full 5 seconds. During those 5 seconds, I could feel everyone behind me staring at my back, Mina's panic, the security guard's confusion, and something rapidly calculating behind Adrian Cole's unfathomable eyes. Then the French gentleman suddenly smiled. It was a faint smile, the curve of his lips barely 15 degrees, but it completely shifted the atmosphere in the entire corridor. Interesting, he said. Then stepped aside with a gesture of invitation. Then please, come in. This lady who happens to speak French. I stepped into the conference room. A dozen or so people sat on either side of the long table, the Chinese and French teams arranged on opposite sides, every face a picture of astonishment. The Chinese representatives' eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets when they saw a janitor walk in. The French representatives looked more curious and surprised, whispering among themselves. I noticed the document spread across the conference table, a framework agreement for a cross-border merger and acquisition, dense clauses covering the entire surface. Several pages had been flipped to the end, with key points of contention circled in red ink and handwritten annotations in the margins. What should I call you? The French gentleman asked, taking his seat at the head of the table and gesturing for me to sit in the empty chair across from him. Nina Chen. I spoke my name in French and sat down in that seat. No extra words, no self-introduction, no explanation of any background. He was clearly pleased with this straightforward style. He nodded and pushed a document toward me. This is the clause we were discussing halfway through. Regarding the transition period arrangement for intellectual property ownership, your colleague didn't have time to translate this section. Can you continue? I glanced down at the document, dense commercial clauses, interwoven with legal terminology and industry-specific jargon. For an ordinary French learner, even someone who had studied for 4 or 5 years, these words would be a headache. But what I saw were the case studies I had wrestled with at HEC Paris 6 years ago, the clause structures I had meticulously analyzed during my internship at a French law firm 3 years ago, the linguistic instinct that had been ingrained in me for the first 25 years of my life. I looked up, first confirming in French with the French side their core demands regarding the transition period, then turning to the Chinese team and summarizing the differences in positions in Chinese. The French side wants the transition period to last no more than 18 months, the Chinese side is proposing 24 months, the gap is 6 months. But the French side's real concern isn't the length of time, it's that the boundaries of intellectual property usage during the transition period aren't clear. They're worried that once the core technology is absorbed by the Chinese side during this period, they could be cut out and operate independently once the transition ends. When I finished speaking, a middle-aged man sitting at the far right of the Chinese team abruptly lifted his head. The nameplate in front of him read David Chen, Chief Technology Officer, and he was looking at me as if I were some kind of monster. Of course, a janitor couldn't possibly distill the core points of contention in a cross-border Manda agreement in 30 seconds, but the person in the entire room who should have been the most shocked sat in the corner without saying a word. Adrian Cole had somehow returned to the conference room, seated at the far corner of the long table, leaning back slightly with his arms crossed over his chest, watching me with an unfathomable gaze. He wasn't looking at the document, he wasn't looking at the French representatives, he wasn't even looking at the French gentleman who was studying me with an appraising eye. He was only looking at me. That gaze sent a faint chill down my spine, not from fear, but because I was all too familiar with that look. It was the expression of a person rifling through the archives of memory, searching for a particular file. The process of a vague sense of déjà vu gradually sliding toward confirmation. Was he remembering something? I forced the thought down and focused on the negotiation at hand. The French gentleman, after hearing my summary, his eyes brightening, leaned forward slightly and began firing a series of follow-up questions about the specific arrangements of the transition period. I caught each one, translated, relayed, and re-expressed his core concerns in a way the Chinese team could understand. There were a few technical terms where even I had to quickly search my mental database to find the most precise equivalent, but I never stumbled once, never hesitated for a single pause. 15 minutes later, the framework for the transition period clause was essentially settled. The French gentleman leaned back in his chair, took off his reading glasses and wiped them, and when he looked at me again, the scrutiny in his eyes had transformed into a curiosity tinged with appreciation. Miss Chen, he said in a tone like someone savoring a fine wine, where did you learn your French? Here it was. This question was bound to come eventually, and I was prepared. I learned it back home, I said with a light smile, answering casually, at a language school. He raised one eyebrow, clearly not convinced, but his good breeding kept him from pressing further. He simply nodded meaningfully and said something that made everyone in the room hold their breath. If every employee of coal industries were as excellent as Miss Chen, then there would be no obstacles to our cooperation at all. In diplomatic language, that was essentially equivalent to "I'm willing to sign the contract." A suppressed sigh of relief rippled through the Chinese team. Someone even clenched their fist in excitement. Mina Fang stood at the conference room door, her eyes reddened, whether from fear or emotion, I couldn't tell, and I sat in that seat, my expression as calm as if nothing had happened, beginning to gather the documents in front of me, preparing to stand and leave. I had done what I needed to do. Now it was time to return to my cleaning cart. But just as I rose to my feet, a voice sounded from the corner. Wait, Adrian Cole spoke. He rose from the corner, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow under the conference room lights. He wasn't wearing a jacket, his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to mid-forearm, revealing defined wrists and a glimpse of an old scar. He walked toward me, not quickly, but each step was steady and deliberate, like a leopard closing in on its prey. He stopped in front of me, looking down at me. We were less than 2 feet apart, close enough for me to see the faint dark circles under his eyes, evidence of chronic sleep deprivation, and to catch the cool scent of cedar and sandalwood mixed in his cologne. He didn't speak, he just looked at me with that searching expression, the one that seemed to be rifling through some mental archive, only this time it was sharper, more certain. Then, suddenly, he smiled. It was a faint smile, the curve of his lips barely more pronounced than the old Frenchman's had been, but it transformed his entire face. The cold hardness, the razor-edge sharpness, they softened for just a moment, like something warm rising beneath a frozen surface. Jian Ning, he said my name slowly, as if savoring the sound of each syllable. Yes, Mr. Li. I lowered my head slightly, letting my gaze settle on his shirt buttons instead of his eyes. How long have you been at Li Group? 3 months. 3 months. He repeated it, his tone rising just slightly. 3 months. Working as a janitor. That wasn't a question, it was a statement, and there was no mockery in his voice, no suspicion, only a weight I couldn't quite decipher. Everyone in the conference room had frozen mid-motion, all eyes fixed on us. The French delegation couldn't understand a word of Chinese, but they could smell the shift in the air. Curious expressions rippled across their faces. Director Fang, Li Yejue's gaze finally left me, sliding to Mina Fang, who was still standing in the doorway looking stunned. Where's Su Yaro? Mina snapped back to attention. She's in the lounge next door. Her voice still won't come out. The clinic staff are examining her. Bring her here. Mina hesitated, as if she wanted to say something, but one look at Li Yejue's face killed whatever words were forming. She turned and hurried out. Less than 2 minutes later, Su Yaro was escorted in. She wore a tailored cream-colored suit, her makeup flawless, waves of hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked like she belonged in this room, every inch of her did, except for her face. Her complexion was deathly pale, her lips nearly bloodless, one hand pressed against her throat, the rims of her eyes faintly red. She looked utterly pitiful. The moment she stepped through the door, her eyes found me and her pupils contracted sharply. It was a subtle shift, the kind of change you'd miss if you blinked, like a hairline crack appearing in a carefully maintained mask. It lasted less than a second before she smoothed it over, but I saw it clearly. She knew me, or rather, she recognized me, and I recognized her right back. Su Yao, executive secretary to the CEO's office at Li Group, and also, if even half of the water cooler gossip was true, the semi-official, family-arranged candidate for Li Yejue's future wife. Of course, none of that had anything to do with me. I was just a janitor who had just saved a multinational negotiation for the company, that was all. But the look Su Yaro was giving me said she had no intention of letting it stay just that. Su Yaro, Li Yejue's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that brooked no resistance. When the interpretation broke down earlier, what were you doing? Su Yaro opened her mouth, forcing out a few strained words in a whisper. I'm so sorry, Mr. Li. My throat suddenly lost your voice. Li Yejue finished the sentence for her, his tone as flat as if he were commenting on the weather. At a meeting you'd been preparing for 3 weeks. At the most important cross-border project of the company's year, your voice suddenly gave out. Su Yaro's body swayed, the sheen in her eyes grew more pronounced. She bit her lower lip and pointed at her throat with her free hand, silently communicating I really did my best. Li Yejue watched her. He didn't say he believed her, he didn't say he didn't. Instead, he turned to Mina Fang and asked a question that made everyone in the room go still. Who made the translation team's shift schedule? Mina blinked. It was Su Yaro and I who made it together. Today, the only French interpreter on duty was Su Yaro. The other two, one on sick leave, one on a business trip. Who decided that arrangement? Mina's lips moved, but no words came out. Her gaze drifted involuntarily toward Su Yaro. That one glance said everything. Li Yejue didn't press further, he simply nodded, then delivered a sentence that detonated through the conference room like a bomb. Director Fang, transfer Jian Ning's file from facilities to the CEO's office. Position, my executive interpreter. Salary, senior interpreter. Pay scale, effective tomorrow. Mina's eyes went wide, her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and finally squeezed out a single word. Yes, sir. Su Yaro's head snapped up, the hand on her throat dropped. She'd forgotten to keep up the act. Her eyes churned with disbelief and something close to raw fury, but her composure was still intact. Barely. The crack in her mask was sealed over in an instant, replaced by that practiced, pitiful expression, and I stood there, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Shock, curiosity, envy, scrutiny, like 100 needles pricking my skin. I'd only wanted to go back to my cleaning cart, push it down the hallway until I disappeared into the background, stay invisible, but this man had just shoved me into the spotlight with a single sentence, and he wasn't finished. Li Yejue turned back to face me. The ceiling lights behind him cast a cold silver outline around his silhouette. His eyes, backlit, looked impossibly deep, like 2 ancient wells with no bottom in sight. He spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed in the ears of everyone in that room like a hammer. One more thing. He paused, that faint smile returned to his lips, but this time there was something unshakable in it, something absolute. Jen Ning, 6 years ago, outside that bakery in the 7th arrondissement of Paris. The old woman who was being robbed, do you remember? My heart skipped a beat. 6 years ago, Paris, the 7th arrondissement, a bakery. Those words were a key, sliding with surgical precision into a lock I had deliberately sealed somewhere deep in my memory, a twist, and the sealed images came flooding back in a torrent, but my face didn't move a muscle. That was a reflex I'd honed during my years in France. The more accurate the hit, the more expressionless you had to be. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mr. Lee. I tilted my head slightly, my tone confused and natural. I've never been to France. His eyes narrowed. The look of a hunter watching prey try to slip the trap flickered across his face for just a moment. Never been to France. He repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them for authenticity. Then he let out a short laugh. It was a quiet sound, light as a feather landing on still water, but the ripples it sent through that room changed the entire atmosphere. Never been to France. Yet you speak Parisian French more fluently than the French themselves. He lowered his head, leaning in close enough that I could see my own reflection in his dark brown pupils. Jen Ning, your lying skills are far worse than your interpreting skills. Before I could even think of a response, he straightened up, turned to the stunned room, and said in the same tone one might use to announce the weather, the sentence that turned every single person there to stone, "This woman, I'm going to marry her." When those words landed, the conference room went silent for a full 10 seconds. I'm not exaggerating, a genuine 10 seconds. I counted them in my head, 1, 2, 3, and when I reached 10, someone on the French side finally reacted, whispering to their neighbor in hushed, disbelieving tones. The Chinese side was even more entertaining. A middle-aged executive sitting third from the right on the long table had his coffee cup suspended mid-air, neither setting it down nor bringing it to his lips. Frozen like a statue with the pause button pressed, Su Yaro's face went white as paper. This time, it wasn't an act, it was real. The hand that had been pressed to her throat had fallen away at some point, her fingers now gripping the hem of her jacket, knuckles bone-white. The look she shot at Li Yejue was almost pleading, a silent, desperate entreaty for him to take it back. Even just kidding would have done, but Li Yejue didn't look at her, he didn't look at anyone, only at me. His gaze was like a layer of transparent resin, casting me in place where I stood. Mr. Lee, I finally found my voice, keeping it as steady as I could. That joke isn't funny, I don't joke with my employees, his response came without a beat of hesitation, like he'd been expecting that exact question. You've been at Lee Group for 3 months, hasn't anyone told you that about me? Actually, yes, someone had. In the water cooler gossip, there was one universally accepted fact about Li Yejue: the man didn't tell jokes. He barely even smiled. He could make an entire conference room scalp crawl with a single look, but he was absolutely not someone who cracked jokes in a professional setting, which made what he'd just said even more absurd. Then this is even more inappropriate. I unclenched the fingers I hadn't realized I'd been clenching, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Mr. Lee, I don't know what your intention is behind that statement, but if it's because my interpreting work today made you feel I deserve some kind of reward, I hope you'll consider a different form, a raise, a transfer. I'd accept either of those. A raise and a transfer don't conflict with marrying you. He said it with remarkable flatness, like he was discussing 2 non-exclusive clauses in a contract. You want a raise, I'll have finance handle it. You want a transfer, I'll have Fang handle it. But me marrying you, that was already decided the moment you chose to walk into this room. My temple throbbed. What the hell was this man talking about? What did the moment you chose to walk into this room even mean? I'd saved his negotiation, and his way of repaying me was to drag me into an even bigger mess. What kind of logic was that? But before I could fire back, he had already turned away, facing the French chairman seated at the far end of the conference table. The silver-haired old gentleman had been watching the entire scene unfold with obvious amusement, his expression that of a man enjoying an unexpectedly entertaining interlude. Mr. Laurent, Adrian switched back to French, fluent and precise, carrying a cadence entirely different from the way he spoke English. Please forgive the interruption. Allow me to introduce this young lady, Nina Chen. Today marks her first appearance in a professional capacity as an interpreter, but she will soon become my wife. My heart slammed against my ribs. What was he doing? He hadn't just said it in front of the Chinese team, he was repeating it in front of the foreign partners. Was he trying to make this as public as humanly possible? Mr. Laurent, chairman of the board of Falex Group, one of the most influential figures in European business, slowly rose from his chair. He smoothed the front of his jacket, walked over to me, and studied me with fresh eyes, as though seeing me for the first time. Then he broke into a smile. It was bigger than any expression he'd worn all day, the corners of his eyes crinkling into deep folds, his whole demeanor radiating the satisfaction of a man who had just heard exactly what he'd been hoping for. "It seems my judgment today was correct, Mr. Laurent said in French, his tone carrying that old-school gentlemanly warmth. "I said earlier that if every employee of coal industries were as exceptional as Miss Chen, our partnership would face no obstacles whatsoever. Now Mr. Cole tells me he intends to make this most exceptional employee his wife. In my view, that is the wisest decision to come out of this meeting." I opened my mouth, searching for words to correct this increasingly absurd situation, but Mr. Laurent had already taken my hand, speaking to me the way an elder blesses a beloved grandchild. "Miss Chen, your French reminds me of a lecture I attended at the Sorbonne in my youth. The professor's accent was exactly like yours, pure Parisian, a sound we rarely hear these days. If you do one day become the future Mrs. Cole, I do hope you'll visit us in Paris. My wife would adore you." The corner of my mouth twitched involuntarily. This titan of industry, sharp as an old fox across the negotiating table, was now looking at me with nothing but genuine admiration and blessing in his eyes. He didn't even know my full name, didn't know my background, didn't know where I came from or what I'd done. He judged me worthy of being the future Mrs. Cole based solely on 15 minutes of French, the French and their romanticism. It was almost laughable. "Mr. Laurent, you're too kind," I managed, forcing the words out while my mind raced, desperately calculating how to extract myself from this situation. But Adrian Cole had no intention of giving me an escape route. He moved to my side with natural ease, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair, a gesture that from any angle read as an unmistakable declaration: "This woman belongs to me, and no one touches her." "Now then, since the translation issue has been resolved, and Mr. Laurent seems quite pleased with our future Mrs. Cole," Adrian's voice carried a rare note of lightness, "let's return to business. Regarding the specific transition plan, Nina has already summarized the key points of contention quite clearly. Let's move directly into the details." He'd used those words. Future Mrs. Cole, in front of the French delegation, in front of the Chinese executives, in front of Mina, Yvonne, and the two security officers standing by the door. The words left his mouth as casually as if he were discussing tomorrow's weather, but the weight of their landing could have cracked the foundation of Cole Tower itself. The rest of the negotiation proceeded with remarkable smoothness, perhaps because Mr. Laurent's mood had been lifted by the little scene, perhaps because the core issues I'd outlined had given both sides a clear framework for discussion. Whatever the reason, the terms that had been deadlocked for hours reached preliminary consensus within 60 minutes. Both parties agreed to sign the formal framework agreement in 3 days. As Mr. Laurent departed, he even turned back specifically to wink at me, saying in French, "I look forward to seeing you in Paris." I maintained a polite smile as I saw the French team out. The moment I turned around, the smile vanished. Only the Chinese side remained in the conference room. Adrian sat at the head of the table, speaking in low tones with Mina. The other executives gathered their things and filed out one by one, each stealing a second glance at me as they passed, their eyes a cocktail of curiosity, shock, confusion, and a hint of wary respect. They didn't know how to categorize me. 3 hours ago, I'd been the most insignificant presence in this building, pushing a cleaning cart silently through the corridors, invisible to everyone. 3 hours later, I was the mysterious janitor who'd saved an entire negotiation with flawless French, and the woman the CEO had publicly declared he intended to marry. The gap was too vast. No one could process it that quickly, including me. When the last unrelated person had left the room, I walked up to Adrian, drew a deep breath, and said in a voice pitched for his ears only, "Mr. Cole, I need an explanation." He looked up at me, a glint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "An explanation for what?" "For what you just said." My voice was low but every word was deliberate. "Why would you say something like that? You know we've never met before today, you know nothing about me, and I know nothing about you. Under those circumstances, publicly announcing you intend to marry someone, do you think that's reasonable?" He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, posture relaxed and easy, but the sharpness in his gaze hadn't dimmed a fraction. He studied me for a few seconds, then asked a question that seemed completely irrelevant. "You used to live in the 7th arrondissement of Paris, didn't you?" My heart skipped another beat. But my expression didn't so much as flicker. I told you, I've never been to France, you did say that. He nodded, his tone carrying the patient indulgence of a hunter watching his prey struggle. But what you said was a lie, Mr. Cole. If you've decided I'm lying, there's nothing I can do about that. But you can't publicly announce you're going to marry me based on a lie you've decided on your own. 6 years ago, he cut me off, his voice dropping suddenly, low enough to be a secret meant only for my ears. Paris, 7th arrondissement, the corner of Rue Saint-Dominique. An old shop called DuPont Bakery. On a rainy weekday afternoon, a Chinese girl in a grey trench coat helped an elderly French woman stop the man who'd snatched her handbag. My breath caught 6 years ago. Paris, the 7th, DuPont Bakery, rain, grey trench coat, a robbery. The details clicked together like a key sliding into a lock I'd deliberately sealed away in the deepest corner of my memory, and then turning, mercilessly. I remembered that day, I remembered the rain. I remembered the mingled scent of butter and caramel drifting from the bakery. I remembered the French woman's cry when her handbag was ripped from her grasp. I remembered the gust of air as the thief sprinted past me, but more than any of that, I remembered the man who'd helped me bring him down. Stopping a street thief in Paris wasn't easy, especially for a Chinese exchange student. The robber was a brute well over 6 feet tall. I'd grabbed hold of his jacket, but the strength difference was what it was. I could only slow him down for a few seconds. In those few seconds, a man in dark clothing had sprinted across the street and brought the thief to the ground with a clean, efficient takedown. I'd only seen that man once, for less than 5 minutes total. He'd helped me call the police, confirmed I wasn't hurt, and left without even giving his name. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, just assumed he was a kind stranger passing by. Later, at the Paris police station, the officers told me the thief was a repeat offender with several similar cases on his record, and that catching him was doing the public a service. The old woman's name was Madame Dubois. I'd visited her twice at the hospital. She lived in an old apartment building in the 7th, her mantelpiece crowded with photographs of her late husband. She'd claimed me as her god-granddaughter and knitted me a red scarf. I still had it, folded neatly in the closet of my rental apartment, but I had never once connected the face of the man who'd helped me subdue that thief with the suited CEO sitting across from me now. No, wait, I suddenly remembered. The man who'd helped me hold the thief down, he'd been wearing a face mask. Paris spring carried heavy pollen, and plenty of people wore masks on the street. His features had been mostly hidden. I'd only clearly seen his eyes, and right now, Adrian Cole was looking at me with those very eyes. The same shape, the same deep color, the same slight upward tilt at the corners, even the same habit when he looked at someone, a brief squint first, then focus, as if taking a mental photograph before engaging, identical to the man on that Paris street 6 years ago. You remember now, he caught the flicker in my eyes, and that faint curve at the corner of his mouth reappeared. You finally remember. I drew a long breath, forcing myself back to composure. That was you. It was me. You weren't just passing through. Of course not. His tone was casual, like he was stating some trivial, insignificant fact. That day I followed you for 3 blocks. I was going to find a chance to talk to you. You bought a croissant and a black coffee at the bakery, sat by the window, and finished both before leaving. That grey trench coat was an older Burberry style. The cuffs were worn thin, but it was pressed perfectly. When you eat, you always break things in half first, eat one half, and wrap the other in a napkin and tuck it into your bag, probably saving it for breakfast the next day. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but because of what it meant that a person could remember every single detail about someone else so vividly. 6 years later, every small habit, every worn cuff, every half-eaten croissant wrapped in a napkin, he had carried all of it with him for 6 years. What kind of person held on to another's ordinary morning with that kind of precision? You followed me, I found my voice, and it came out edged with wariness. I was in Paris on business back then, staying at a hotel near that street. The first day I saw you, I thought you were a local Chinese expat. Then I heard you take a phone call in Mandarin and realized you were from China. His tone was so frank it didn't sound like a lie. A Chinese girl alone on the streets of Paris, taking the same route every day. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. Do you think that explanation holds up? No, it doesn't. He admitted it openly, without hesitation, then added, which is why I spent the next 6 years convincing myself it was just a chance encounter, nothing worth revisiting, until today. You were standing in the hallway in your janitor's uniform, and I recognized you at a glance. There was no melodrama in his voice when he said it, no deliberate emotional weight. It sounded like He was stating a conclusion he had verified countless times over the years, a conclusion that had finally received its definitive confirmation at 2:32 this afternoon. The moment I opened my mouth and spoke my first sentence in French, I was silent for a few seconds. The direction this whole situation had taken was far beyond anything I had anticipated. My original plan had been simple: take an unremarkable job at coal industries, save up enough money, wait for the right moment to leave this city, and start over somewhere else. My resume was fabricated. The janitor position didn't require a rigorous background check, which was exactly why I'd been able to stay here for 3 months without being discovered. I had been a ghost, deliberately invisible, moving through the building like a shadow that left no trace. But now, everything was in chaos. So you announced in front of everyone that you're going to marry me. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache starting to form. You think that's reasonable? Whether it's reasonable doesn't matter. He stood up, towering nearly a full head above me, looking down at me. What matters is efficiency. You disappeared for 6 years. I searched for you for 6 years. Today you show up in my company, wearing my company's janitorial uniform, and you step in to save the day during my most critical negotiation. If you think all of that is coincidence, then you're more naive than I am. I really am a janitor at coal industries. I came up here today because administration asked me to clean the carpet in the VIP lounge. I know. He cut me off. I already had someone pull the facility's dispatch records. You were indeed temporarily reassigned, but that's not what I'm talking about. He lowered his head slightly, closing the distance between us. That cold, sharp scent of cedar and sandalwood enveloped me again, filling my lungs, making the space between us feel impossibly small. What I'm asking is why you're in this city, in this building, within my line of sight. His voice dropped so low it felt like a secret meant only for the two of us. Nina, whatever reason you're hiding here, from this moment on, you don't have to hide anymore. I jerked my head up to look at him. What did he know? Had he looked into me? Impossible. My resume was fake, sure, but it had passed coal industry's basic hiring screening, which meant it could at least hold up on the surface. For 3 months I had kept a lower profile than a speck of dust. I never got close to anyone. I never attended any social event that required registered identification. I kept my head down, clocked in, clocked out, and vanished into the city every evening. There was no channel through which he could have discovered my true identity. Unless he hadn't been investigating Nina Chen, he'd been investigating the girl in the grey trench coat in Paris 6 years ago. I didn't know what methods he'd used, how much time or resources he'd burned, but a man like him, if he set his mind to finding someone, 6 years was more than enough to dig up a great deal. The thought made my stomach drop. I don't know what you're talking about. I stepped back, putting distance between us, and slipped my mask of blank composure back into place. Mr. Cole, you helped catch a mugger for me in Paris, and I'm grateful, but you and I had never formally met before today. You don't know anything about me. Everything you just said, I'll chalk up to impulse under the pressure of the meeting. From here on, let's each go back to our own lanes. You keep being CEO, and you can't go back to being a janitor anymore. His tone turned suddenly practical, the way one discusses an already finalized business decision. What happened in the last 15 minutes has probably already spread through the entire building. You want to go back to being an invisible nobody? Not possible. The moment you walk through the employee entrance tomorrow morning in your janitor's uniform, half the floor will swarm you just to get a look. He was right. I couldn't argue with that. The image of it was already forming in my mind, the whispers, the stares, the phones coming out to capture the janitor who spoke flawless French. My carefully constructed invisibility had been shattered in a single afternoon. So what? I met his eyes. So your solution is to marry me. My solution is to first give you a legitimate reason to be by my side. The executive interpreter position was decided on the spot in that meeting. Nobody will question it. He adjusted his cuff, his tone returning to that cool, businesslike composure. As for marrying you, every word I said was serious. Not a joke, not a tactic, not a business strategy. When Adrian Cole says he's going to marry someone, he means it. I almost laughed, but that urge to laugh never reached my lips, because the conference room door suddenly swung open from the outside. Yvonne Park stood in the doorway. She had reapplied her makeup, touched up her lipstick, and looked considerably more composed than the pitiful figure she'd presented earlier. But there was something in her eyes that put me on alert, not anger, not jealousy, but an extremely calm, appraising scrutiny, like a chess player reassessing an opponent who had just appeared on the board. Mr. Cole, her voice was still a bit hoarse, but she could speak now. The clinic examined me. They said it's acute vocal cord edema, possibly a side effect from the allergy. Medication I took this morning. I'm feeling much better now. Adrian glanced at her and gave a brief nod, his tone flat. Since you're not feeling well, go home and rest today. When you come in tomorrow, go straight to Mina Fang. She'll walk you through the personnel changes in the translation team. Yvonne's expression didn't change. She even maintained a perfectly measured smile at the corners of her mouth, but her fingers curled slightly at her side. It was a tiny movement. If I hadn't been standing at exactly that angle, I never would have noticed it. The small tell, a crack in the polished facade. Of course, thank you for your concern, Mr. Cole. She finished speaking, then turned her gaze to me, her smile warm and polished. Nina, right, I just heard from Director Fang about what happened. Truly remarkable. A janitor who speaks French that fluently. It caught everyone completely off guard. She put extra weight on the word janitor. It was subtle, so subtle that if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it entirely, but it was one of those linguistic techniques only women truly understand, praising you on the surface while reminding everyone of your most humiliating identity underneath. A velvet knife. I smiled back at her, faintly. Thank you for the compliment, Ms. Park, but since your throat just recovered, you should probably avoid talking too much. Vocal cord edema tends to relapse. Her smile froze for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, then she recovered her graceful composure, nodded at me, and turned to leave the conference room. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor was crisp and rhythmic, fading step by step until it disappeared at the end of the hallway. Adrian watched the direction she'd gone, thoughtful for a silent 2 seconds, then turned his gaze back to me. Let's go. Where? First, I'll take you to process your transfer paperwork, then we'll get something to eat. He picked up his suit jacket from the back of the chair, moving with the casual ease of someone doing something he'd planned long ago. You definitely didn't have lunch today. The meeting started at 1:30. You were reassigned to the 15th floor to handle the carpet at 12:40, which means you were probably standing in line at the cafeteria around then. I blinked. How do you know what time I usually eat in the cafeteria? I don't. He slipped on the jacket and fastened one button. I just extrapolated from your work schedule. Janitorial staff lunch breaks are scheduled after the administrative teams. That's facilities policy. Today's cafeteria menu was sweet and sour pork with stir-fried vegetables. If you got there late, the pork would have been gone. He was right. I had only managed to get a plate of vegetables at lunch. The pork had been cleaned out by the people ahead of me. I remembered staring at the empty tray, feeling the familiar resignation of always being last in line. But what did that have to do with him? He didn't give me much time to think. He was already striding toward the conference room door. When he reached it, he paused and turned back to look at me, backlit by the corridor lights. His expression was hard to read, but his tone carried an unshakable certainty. And one more thing, Nina, don't tell me again that you've never been to France. 6 years ago at that bakery, you bought 2 croissants, ate one on the spot, wrapped the other in a napkin, and tucked it into that faded canvas bag. The bag had the Sorbonne Nouvelle logo on it. I went to the university the very next day and looked up your records. He paused, a meaningful curve forming at the corner of his mouth. So I've known exactly who you are since 6 years ago. Letting you tell me yourself was me being respectful. Then he turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving me standing there alone, my mind completely blank. The corridor lights were cold and bright, casting a thin sheen across the marble floor. My cleaning cart was still parked outside the VIP lounge, the half-damp rag draped over the handle, long gone cold. 3 hours ago, when I'd pulled that rag out of the bucket, it had still been warm. The warmth had seeped into my palms, grounding me in the simple, mindless rhythm of the work. Back then, I had still been invisible, and now, the CEO of Coal Industries was telling me that I was the one he'd been searching for 6 years. He wanted to marry me, and I didn't even know where to begin arguing. I drew a deep breath and pushed my cleaning cart toward the exit. Whatever was going to happen next, today's work wasn't done yet. The VIP lounge carpet still needed one final check. Life had to go on, even if it had just veered onto a road I couldn't begin to make sense of. That evening, my rental apartment. I lived a 40-minute subway ride from Coal Tower, in a single room partitioned off inside one of those aging residential buildings. $800 a month, no elevator, half the motion sensor lights in the hallway were dead. Compared to the gleaming commercial district where Coal Industries stood, this place felt like another world entirely. I showered, changed into my pajamas, and sat on the edge of the bed drying my hair. 3 unread messages glowed on my phone screen, all from the same person. Nina, congratulations. I heard from finance that you're being transferred to the CEO's office. God, you really know how to keep a secret. The whole facilities department is talking about you right now, some people say. You're a rich heiress slumming it to experience real life, some are guessing you're a corporate spy, and someone actually said you're Adrian's long-lost first love. Ha ha ha. Speaking of which, watch your back with Yvonne. She just posted in the admin group chat, saying I hope everyone will be kind to our new colleague. After all, we all start from different places. On the surface it sounds like she's sticking up for you, but the passive-aggressive tone is so obvious. A few of us girls in the group are already worried for you. The sender was Lily Lynn, the warehouse clerk in facilities, the only person in that entire building I could call a friend. On my first day, when I couldn't find a seat in the cafeteria, she was the one who waved me over to sit with her. A girl with a ponytail and 2 dimples when she smiled, 3 years younger than me, blunt and straightforward, the only person in the entire department who never played games. I typed back, got it, thanks for the heads up. Let's talk tomorrow. I set the phone down and lay in bed, staring at the thin crack running across the ceiling. Yvonne Park. I closed my eyes and replayed the scene outside the conference room that afternoon. The moment Yvonne saw me, her pupils had contracted. That wasn't the normal reaction of someone encountering a stranger in a janitor's uniform. That was the involuntary physical response of a person who just recognized someone who had no business being there. She knew me, not the kind of knowing that comes from hearing about someone for the first time today, the kind that comes from having known about me long before. But I had never met Yvonne Park in my life. In all my 28 years, that name had never once crossed my path. I could say that with absolute certainty. So why did she recognize me? There was only one explanation. She didn't know Nina Chen, the janitor. She knew the real me. The thought sent a chill crawling up my spine. If Yvonne really knew my true identity, it meant I could no longer quietly save up my money and disappear the way I'd planned. She would become a ticking time bomb, and I had no idea how long the fuse was. I rolled over and buried my face in the pillow, forcing myself to stop thinking. Tomorrow would bring tomorrow's problems. Tonight, I needed to sleep, but my phone buzzed again, cutting through my thoughts. This time it was Mina Fang. Her tone was strictly professional, but there was a subtle politeness woven between the lines. 3 hours ago, she'd looked at me the way a manager sizes up a low-level employee. Now, every message she sent ended with a courteous please. Nina, please report to the CEO's office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Cole has an off-site engagement that requires an interpreter. I've sent the full schedule to your work email, please check it. Also, your new ID badge and access card will be ready at the front desk tomorrow morning. You can pick up your new uniform from administration. We've already prepared it in your size based on your onboarding file. I stared at the words CEO's office on the screen for a long moment, then typed back a single word, received. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Adrian Cole himself. When had he saved my number? 8:30 tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting for you downstairs at the building. Wear formal attire, not the janitorial uniform. No greeting, no sign-off. The tone was so clipped it bordered on a command, but the phrase "I'll be waiting for you" carried an intimacy that made me deeply uncomfortable, as if we weren't a boss and an employee who'd only properly met today, but 2 people in some relationship that had been going on for a very long time. I didn't reply. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and pulled the blanket over myself, cocooning into a tight ball. The crack on the ceiling was faintly visible in the darkness. Like a wound that would never fully heal, tomorrow was a new day, and the world I was about to step into was completely different from the quiet, carefully guarded life I'd maintained for the past 3 months. I closed my eyes. The last image that flashed through my mind before sleep took me was that rainy afternoon in Paris, 6 years ago, outside the DuPont bakery. A man in a black mask had sprinted across the street and taken down the mugger with one clean, decisive move. The moment he looked up at me, rainwater sliding off his brow, the light in his eyes cut straight through the grey Parisian sky and bored directly into mine. That look, it was exactly the same look Adrian Cole had given me in the conference room today. The next morning at 8:20, I stood at the entrance of Cole Tower, wearing the new uniform administration had delivered overnight, a charcoal grey professional suit, perfectly tailored, crisp fabric, compared to the faded janitorial uniform I'd worn yesterday. It might as well have been from another world. The receptionist blinked when I gave her my name, then handed me my new ID badge and access card with both hands, barely concealing her curiosity. The badge bore my photo. God knows when they'd pulled my onboarding picture from the system, and next to it, the title read, CEO's Office Time Senior Interpreter. That photo was taken 3 months ago. My hair was tied back carelessly, my face expressionless, my eyes flat. I didn't look like someone starting a new job. I looked like someone coming to collect a debt, but now that photo was printed on a badge with the gold-embossed Coal Industries logo, sitting next to the words Senior Interpreter, and somehow it had acquired an absurd sort of gravity. MS, Chen, Mr. Cole is already waiting in the car. The receptionist's voice was carefully polite, her gaze drifting toward the entrance. I followed her eyes. A black Maybach sat at the front entrance, its taillights still glowing. Coal Tower had a strict rule. No vehicle was permitted to remain at the main entrance for more than 3 minutes. The head of security had once gotten into an argument with a client over it and had ultimately forced the man to move his car, but this Maybach was parked there as if it owned the place, with 4 security officers standing in a neat row beside it, heads bowed, not one of them daring to say a word. I took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving door. The car door opened as I approached, not by the driver, but by Adrian Cole himself, pushing it open from the inside. He sat in the rear left seat, reading a document, and without looking up, said, "Get in." I bent down and slid inside. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing out all outside noise. A faint scent of cedar and sandalwood filled the cabin, the same scent that clung to him. The leather seat was so plush it felt like sinking into a warm cloud, but my back stayed ramrod straight, like a bowstring pulled taut. "Did you learn your French at Sorbonne Nouvelle?" He closed the document and turned to look at me, asking the question with the casual tone of someone commenting on the weather, while my heart clenched in my chest. "Here." It was. I knew he wouldn't let this go. The words he'd left me with yesterday, "I've known everything about you since 6 years ago," had lodged in my mind like a splinter, keeping me tossing and turning all night. If he'd really been looking into me since then, how deep had he dug? Did he know my real name? Did he know why I'd come to this city, working the most menial job under a false identity? "Mr. Cole, if you've already investigated everything, then there's no need to ask me." I didn't answer directly. I turned my head to watch the city streets blur past the window, keeping my voice as flat as I could manage. He laughed suddenly. It was a quiet sound, but in the silent cabin, it rang out with startling clarity. "Nina, do you know what I admire most about you?" He didn't wait for me to answer, just continued on his own. "You never panic when you're caught. 6 years ago at the Paris police station, you were like that. Yesterday in the conference room, you were like that. And now, you're still like that. Your composure is not that of an ordinary person." "Maybe I'm not an ordinary person," I said without thinking. I regretted it the moment the words left my mouth, because Adrian Cole's expression shifted subtly, like a thin sheet of ice struck by a pebble, cracks spreading from the center while the surface held. He studied me for 2 full seconds, then looked away, his tone settling back into that maddeningly unreadable calm. "You're right, you're not an ordinary person. Wouldn't earn a master's degree from HEC Paris, then come back to work as a janitor at a corporate office and hide for 3 months. My fingers tightened imperceptibly on my knee. The HEC Paris master's degree. He really had found out, which meant he almost certainly knew my real name, my family background, and exactly why I was here, but he hadn't said it outright. Instead, he was peeling back the layers one by one, like an onion, pausing after each reveal to watch my reaction. This man's patience and his need for control were far more frightening than I'd imagined. "Everyone makes their own choices," I said, my voice steady enough that even I was impressed. "I don't find being a janitor shameful. I never said you felt embarrassed." His gaze returned to my face, and this time there was no probing in his eyes, replaced instead by a certainty that was somewhat unsettling, like a hunter who had already pinpointed his prey's hiding place and was merely waiting to close the net. "You're hiding in this building, not to experience life, and not to escape anything. You're waiting for an opportunity. What opportunity? That's for you to answer." He leaned back into his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly, like a lazy yet alert leopard. "But I can tell you this, whatever opportunity you're waiting for, it's already arrived since the moment you walked into that conference room yesterday. You don't need to hide anymore, Jen Ning, or should I call you by another name?" The car fell silent for about 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, our gazes met. In the air, like 2 unsheathed swords clashing silently, the blades sensing each other's edge even through the scabbards, I could feel him observing every micro-expression of mine, the frequency of my blinks, the dilation of my pupils, the subtle twitches of the muscles around my mouth, and I was observing his just as closely. This was a silent battle, and I had to admit, this man was the toughest opponent I had ever faced, not because of his power and wealth, those things meant nothing to me, but because of those eyes of his that seemed to see through everything, as if they could pierce through every layer of disguise and reach the truest version of yourself beneath. "Jen Ning," I finally spoke, my tone calm and resolute, and even I was surprised that there wasn't a trace of tremor in my voice. My name is Jian Ning. No matter what you've uncovered, Mr. Li, the person standing in front of you right now goes by that name. He didn't press further, but the slight curve at the corner of his mouth told me he wasn't convinced by my words. He had simply chosen to let it go for now, like a cat releasing the mouse from under its paw, not because it wasn't hungry, but because it wasn't done playing yet. The car came to a stop in front of a hotel. I glanced through the window. It was a 5-star business hotel, with a red line of text scrolling across the electronic screen by the entrance, warmly welcoming Mr. Bernard, chairman of the board of the Filet Group, and his delegation. So, today's outing was still related to Filet after all. Yesterday's large-scale meeting had only been the beginning. The framework agreement had been signed, but the detailed negotiations would require several more rounds, and Mr. Bernard had specifically requested that the cleaning lady who speaks French continue to serve as the interpreter. Fang Minute had told me this in an email last night, with the words designated by the foreign party highlighted in bold. Designated me, a person who, just yesterday, was wearing a cleaning uniform and crouching on the floor wiping up coffee stains, was today designated as the interpreter by the chairman of a multinational conglomerate. When the world turns absurd, it really doesn't bother to ask anyone's permission. I pushed open the car door, ready to get out, when my wrist was suddenly seized. Li Yejue's fingers closed around the inside of my wrist, with just the right amount of pressure, not enough to hurt, but not enough for me to pull free. His fingers were slightly cool, with thin calluses on the pads. These were not the hands of someone who had lived a life of ease, at least not entirely. The position and shape of those calluses looked like the marks left by years of gripping some kind of instrument. My gaze involuntarily drifted to the old scar on his wrist. I had caught a glimpse of it yesterday in the conference room, but now, up close, I could see it was deeper and longer than I had imagined, stretching from the inside of his wrist all the way to where it disappeared beneath his shirt cuff, like a river faded by time, or a crack whose edges had been worn smooth by the years. Once you're inside, you only need to do one thing, he said, looking into my eyes, his voice so low it was almost a whisper meant only for me. Do your job as interpreter. Don't worry about anything else. No matter who asks you anything, no matter how anyone treats you, you don't have to pay them any mind. As long as I'm here, no one can touch you. I looked down at the hand gripping my wrist, then raised my eyes to his face. Mr. Li, are you protecting me, or are you restricting me? Is there a difference? Of course there is. Protection is something I need, restriction is something I don't. He stared at me for 2 seconds, and something seemed to flicker in those unfathomable eyes of his. Then he let go, but the way he released me was interesting. He didn't pull away abruptly, nor did he withdraw with reluctance. Instead, his fingers brushed lightly against my wrist bone before fully letting go. The gesture was so subtle that I almost thought I had imagined it, but the lingering warmth on my wrist bone told me it wasn't a hallucination. Let's go. He pushed open the car door and transformed back into that cold, businesslike CEO. As if the man who had just gripped my wrist had been nothing but an illusion. Over the next 3 days, I participated in the subsequent negotiations between the Li Group and the Filet Group. In my capacity as the accompanying interpreter, the intensity of the negotiations was far greater than I had expected. Every day ran from 9 in the morning to 7 in the evening, with only a working lunch as a break. The topics were no longer just the framework-level matters from the first day, but had been refined down to the equity structure of the joint venture, the allocation of board seats, the scope of core technology licensing, and the division of interests between the two parties. Across various market segments over the next 5 years, every clause was a tug-of-war, and behind every number were billions in real money. None of this was unfamiliar to me. When I was studying at HEC Paris, I had taken a specialized course on cross-border mergers and acquisitions, and after graduating, I had worked for over a year as a commercial legal assistant at a mid-sized law firm in France. The Manda cases I had handled weren't on this scale, but the basic framework and legal logic were the same, so when the two sides were arguing heatedly over a particular clause, I could not only translate the language accurately, but also offer 1 or 2 professional suggestions at critical moments to help both parties find a compromise they could both accept. I remember one time when the two sides were deadlocked for a full 2 hours over the exclusivity clause in the core technology licensing agreement. The air in the conference room had almost solidified. The Chinese side insisted on having exclusive usage rights for 3 years, while the French side refused to budge from demanding 5. Just as the negotiations were about to hit an impasse, I put down my pen and said, in the calmest tone possible, perhaps we could consider a compromise, set the exclusivity period at 3 years, but after the 3 years are up, if the French side wishes to terminate the partnership, they must provide 12 months written notice, and they may not refuse the Chinese side's right of first refusal for renewal under equivalent conditions. The room fell silent for a few seconds, then Mr. Bernard's eyes lit up, and the corner of Li Yejua's mouth twitched slightly. That clause was ultimately accepted by both sides, becoming the least contentious article in the entire agreement. On the afternoon of the third day, the final supplementary agreement was signed. Mr. Bernard rose from his seat, walked around the entire conference table to where I was standing, and, with that characteristically French formality, took both of my hands in his. "Miss Jen," he said in French, his tone even more sincere and enthusiastic than it had been 3 days ago, his weathered eyes gleaming with undisguised admiration. "In my lifetime, I have worked with countless interpreters, but you are the most extraordinary one I have ever met. You don't just translate language, you translate business thinking. If you ever decide you want to change jobs, the doors of the Filet Group will always be open to you." Everyone in the room laughed. And even Li Yejua curved his lips slightly, but even as he smiled, he moved to my side with an effortless, natural motion, half positioning himself in front of me, then extended his hand to Mr. Bernard. "Mr. Bernard, I appreciate your recognition, but this person I cannot let go." Mr. Bernard laughed heartily, clapping Li Yejua on the shoulder and saying in French, "Young man, I can see that, treasure her well." After seeing off the French team, I thought I could finally catch my breath, but it turned out I had been far too naive. Li Yejua's statement that he was going to marry me spread through the entire building, the entire group, and even the entire industry within just 3 days, at a speed far beyond what I had imagined. Financial media started calling the PR department to verify the authenticity of the Li Group CEO's romance. Anonymous posts about the background of the CEO's wife appeared daily in various internal WeChat groups, and even the cleaning ladies in the break room were discussing what exactly is the deal with that new senior interpreter in the CEO's office. And Su Yarrow had been remarkably quiet for 3 days. She hadn't posted any of her usual passive-aggressive remarks in the group chats, hadn't caused me any trouble at work, and even smiled and nodded politely when we passed each other in the hallway, flawlessly elegant. But I noticed one detail on the administrative department's scheduling board. My interpreting assignments had been arranged with unusual density, and most of them were off-site jobs requiring overtime. According to Fang Minute, this was Su Yarrow's way of helping me get familiar with the business as quickly as possible. "She's doing it on purpose," Lin Xiaogua said to me in a low voice during lunch at the cafeteria, her round eyes full of worry. "She's packing your schedule so full because she wants you to make a mistake. Interpreting is exhausting work. When you're tired, you slip up, and the moment you slip up, she's got you." "Jen Ning, you need to be careful." I picked up a piece of greens with my chopsticks, chewed it slowly, and only then answered her. "I know, how could I not know?" Su Yarrow's move wasn't a conspiracy, it was an open scheme. She was openly piling work on me. If I couldn't handle it, it meant I was incompetent. If I complained, it meant I couldn't take the pressure. If I made a mistake, it meant I was unprofessional. It was a flawless play, impossible to find fault with. Her IQ was definitely not low, and precisely because it wasn't low, I was especially wary. A foolish opponent isn't scary, what's scary is a smart and persistent one. "Then why are you still accepting it?" Lin Xiaogua was getting anxious, slapping her chopsticks on the table, drawing glances from the nearby tables. "Go talk to Mr. Li. Isn't he going to marry you? One word from him and Su Yarrow will have to change your schedule." "No need." I swallowed my last bite of rice, stood up, and picked up my tray. "Whatever she assigns me, I'll do. If I make a mistake, I lose." Lin Xiaogua looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but in the end, she said nothing, simply standing up with me and silently carrying her tray to the return station. I didn't go to Li Yejua, not out of pride, but because I knew that in this building, countless eyes were watching the relationship between him and me. If I went to him to solve every problem, that would be equivalent to admitting to everyone that I, Jen Ning, was nothing more than the woman the CEO is going to marry. And that was exactly what Su Yarrow wanted. She wanted everyone to see that I had only gotten this position because of one sentence from Li Yejua, and that without his protection, I was nothing. I wasn't going to give her that chance. At noon on the 4th day, I was in my office organizing materials for an afternoon meeting with a Japanese client when the desk phone suddenly rang. It was Fang Minute. "Jen Ning, Come to conference room 3 now. Fang Min's voice sounded strange, lowered, as if someone were nearby. Right now, I haven't finished organizing the materials for the afternoon meeting with the Japanese client. The meeting has been postponed, Fang Min interrupted, a note in her voice that I couldn't quite decipher. Come over first, there's something we need your cooperation on. I hung up the phone, and alarms were already going off in my head. I had observed Fang Min for 3 days. Her management style was the classic better to say less and make fewer mistakes, and she never gave instructions in such vague terms. She said there's something we need your cooperation on but didn't say what it was, which meant either she couldn't say it, or she didn't dare to. I pushed back my chair, straightened my collar, and headed toward conference room 3. Conference room 3 was at the end of the hallway, usually used for small to medium-sized client meetings, with a capacity of about a dozen people, but as I approached the door, I sensed something was wrong. The door was ajar, and the sounds coming from inside were not those of a dozen people, but a cacophony resembling a small press conference. The murmur of voices squeezed through the crack in the door, mixed with the scraping of chairs, the rustling of papers, and a few deliberately muffled gasps. I pushed open the door, and my steps faltered for a moment on the threshold. Nearly 30 people were seated in the conference room, besides Fang Min. There were several supervisors from the administrative department, the head of HR, accountants from finance, and even a few mid-level managers whose faces I recognized but whose names I couldn't place. They were seated around the long table, documents spread out in front of them, and the moment the door opened, all their eyes turned to me in unison, and seated at the head of the long table was Su Yarrow. She was wearing a sharply tailored beige suit, her makeup so immaculate it looked freshly touched up, with a thick stack of documents in front of her. When she saw me enter, she lifted her chin slightly, a smile curving at the corner of her mouth with just the right angle, a smile that held no hostility, no mockery, only the composed confidence of someone who had already won. Jen Ning, please have a seat. She gestured toward the empty chair at the far end of the table. There are some things we need to verify with you. The conference room held nearly 30 people. Beyond the department directors and managers from Coal Industries headquarters, there were several faces in dark suits I didn't recognize, external hires. By the look of them, at the front of the room, the projector screen blazed with a single line of bold text, Nina Chen, Background Investigation Report. My heart dropped like a stone into cold water, but my face didn't move a muscle. I stood in the doorway, letting my gaze travel slowly across every face in the room, until it finally landed on Yvonne Park, seated at the center of the long table. She was wearing a burgundy suit today, makeup flawless, radiating the kind of commanding presence that made the air around her feel heavier. She looked nothing like the fragile, pitiful figure she'd played outside the conference room 3 days ago. Her voice had fully recovered, clear, forceful, carrying the unshakable confidence of someone who had already counted her winnings. Nina, you're here, Yvonne said, offering me a small smile. It was elegant, perfectly composed, and it reminded me of a spotted snake slowly uncoiling its body in the sun. Please, have a seat. We were just getting to the important part. I didn't sit, I stayed where I was, meeting her gaze with a level stare. Ms. Park, what exactly is this? Director Fang told me to come assist with something, but she didn't mention this was a meeting about me. Oh, that. Yvonne picked up the remote from the table and clicked to the next slide. There's been a lot of talk about you internally lately, and the board felt it was necessary to run a basic due diligence check on the background of the new executive interpreter in the CEO's office. This is standard procedure. No need to be nervous. Standard procedure, due diligence. The words rolled off her tongue with all the polish of a corporate memo, but a real standard procedure doesn't assemble 30 people for a dedicated presentation without notifying the subject in advance. This wasn't an investigation. This was a trial, and she'd chosen today, the day Adrian Cole had flown to Chicago on a 7 a.m. flight, 3 days away, because she'd been planning this ambush for days. My mind was racing at full speed, but I kept my expression in that perfect register of calm. I pulled out the nearest chair, sat down, folded my hands on the table, and settled into my seat like I was attending a meeting that had nothing to do with me. All right then, Ms. Park, please, go ahead. I even smiled at her. A flicker of surprise crossed Yvonne's eyes. She clearly hadn't expected this reaction. No panic, no defensiveness, no desperate call to Adrian for rescue, but she recovered quickly, clicked the remote again, and the screen filled with a scanned document. This is the resume and identity documentation Nina submitted when she joined the company, Yvonne said, using a laser pointer to trace the contents on the screen. Her tone was professional, Clinical, according to this, Nina Chen, 28 years old. High school education, previously employed as cleaning staff at 2 property management companies, no overseas study or work experience. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room before landing on me, the corner of her mouth curved upward. So here's the question: how does a janitor with a high school education and 0 overseas experience speak fluent French with a Parisian accent? How does she outperform professional interpreters with years of experience in an international business? Negotiation. Where did those skills come from? A low murmur rippled through the room, several department directors exchanged glances, some nodded, some frowned. So, I leaned back in my chair, my tone unhurried. What's your conclusion, Ms. Park? My conclusion doesn't matter, Yvonne smiled again. Clicking to the next slide, but I'd like everyone to take a good look at this. The screen now displayed a scanned document in French, with a Chinese translation beside it. The letterhead read HEC. Paris. It was an excerpt from a master's degree graduation list, and one name had been circled prominently in red. Not Nina Chen, my real name, the name I hadn't used in 3 years, the name I'd deliberately erased from every record, every resume, every trace of my existence. The name that had been nailed to the same pillar of shame as my father's. The whispers in the room exploded. An HEC Paris master's. Then why was she working as a janitor at coal industries? No wonder her French was so good. She studied in France, but why hide her education? That doesn't make sense. A high-level degree isn't something to be ashamed of, unless what she's hiding isn't just her education. That last comment came from a man in the corner. I didn't recognize him, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity or scrutiny, it was something darker, the look of someone savoring a prey that had walked into a trap. Yvonne switched off the projector and turned to face the room, her voice carrying that practiced note of reluctant duty. Everyone, I called this meeting today not to target anyone personally, but Coal Industries is in the middle of a cross-border partnership with Falex Group, involving core technology and commercial secrets worth tens of billions. At a critical moment like this, our CEO has someone by his side with a falsified identity, falsified credentials, and possibly even a falsified name. As members of this company, I believe we have both the right and the obligation to find out who exactly is this Miss Nina Chen. She enunciated each word of who exactly with deliberate care, like she was savoring a delicate dessert. The room fell silent for a beat, then every pair of eyes swiveled toward me in unison. The pressure was suffocating, like 30 invisible needles pressing into my skin all at once. Anyone else might have crumbled under that combined assault, but Yvonne had made a fatal mistake. She thought I was just a highly educated person, hiding her credentials to work as a janitor. Everything she'd dug up was still at the level Adrian had already known 3 days ago. She had no idea what I was truly hiding. She had no idea how much Adrian already knew about my identity, far more than her precious investigation report would ever reveal, and more importantly, she had no idea that in these 3 months, I had already prepared for this exact moment. Ms. Park, I said, rising to my feet. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough that every person in that room heard every word. I have a question I'd like to ask you. Yvonne raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to go on the offensive. Go ahead. Which department was responsible for this investigation report? The administration department, in coordination with an external investigation firm. And when was the investigation initiated? Yvonne hesitated for a fraction of a second. 3 days ago, 3 days ago, I nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. So the investigation was launched on the very day Mr. Cole announced in the conference room that he intended to marry me. Your efficiency is truly impressive, Ms. Park. Yvonne's expression shifted, just slightly. Nina, please don't try to change the subject. The issue at hand is that you submitted falsified materials upon joining the company, and this. I'm fully prepared to accept whatever consequences the company deems appropriate for that. I cut her off, my tone as calm as if I were stating a fact that had nothing to do with me. The falsified materials are my problem, and I'll take full responsibility. But everyone in this room, I'd like you to consider another question. I turned to face the assembled crowd, my gaze moving slowly from face to face. 3 days ago, the chairman of Falex Group stood in that conference room, ready to walk out because the interpreter had suddenly lost her voice. Some of you in this room witnessed that moment firsthand. Tell me, what was Ms. Park doing at that time? No one spoke, but more than a few eyes drifted involuntarily toward Yvonne. Ms. Park was unable to continue working due to vocal cord issues. That was an accident, and no one blamed her for it. My voice stayed steady, measured, but what I want to know is, before that crisis happened, who arranged for the other 2 French interpreters to be on sick leave and business travel respectively, who, knowing full well that the Falex negotiation was the most important international engagement of the year, left only one person on the French translation team that day, has Ms. Park explained any of this to everyone here. Yvonne's face had gone completely rigid. She hadn't anticipated that I would turn defense into attack. She certainly hadn't expected that I knew far more than she'd assumed. The shift schedule had been discussed in the company chat group after the meeting that day, but the explosive impact of Adrian's "I intend to marry her" had buried that issue. Now I was dragging that forgotten stone back into the light, and it was crawling with suspicious insects. The shift schedule was a normal work arrangement. Yvonne's voice rose, a crack in her composure. Was it? I glanced at her, then turned to Mina Fang instead of pressing further. Director Fang, you and Ms. Park prepared that schedule together. Was it a joint decision to have only Ms. Park on duty for French translation that day? Mina Fang's face flushed deep red. Her lips moved several times before she finally forced the words out. It was Yvonne's suggestion, she said. The other 2 interpreters had been overworked recently and needed to rotate off. The room erupted in murmurs. Yvonne shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor. Mina, you, Ms. Park, I said, pulling her attention back to me, my voice still level. You asked why I hid my education and came to coal industries as a janitor. Fine, I'll answer you. The entire room went silent in an instant. My family went through some upheaval. I needed a job to sustain basic living expenses. Janitor was the position I could get hired for fastest at the time. I submitted my application, passed the interview, showed up on time every day, and completed every task assigned to me with full effort. I never once treated any job as beneath me because of what I'd studied or done before. That's my answer. I held Yvonne's gaze, my voice dropping lower, but every word landed like a nail driven into the silence, so deep you could hear a pin drop. You claim you were just doing your duty, but I'd like to ask everyone in this room, would someone who truly had the company's best interests at heart deliberately create a translation gap right before the most important negotiation in the company's history? Would someone who genuinely cared about the company's welfare convene 30 people for a kangaroo court targeting a colleague while the CEO was away on business? Miss Sue, were the things you did really for the company's benefit or for some personal agenda of your own? Yvonne's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to say something, but found every pair of eyes in the room fixed on her, not with the same scrutinizing suspicion they'd leveled at me moments ago, but with a dawning, retrospective understanding. Those gazes were like mirrors, exposing every flaw in her high-sounding rhetoric. You're slandering me. Yvonne finally found her voice, but it had lost all its earlier composure. What proof do you have that I did any of this deliberately? I don't have proof, I admitted frankly. Then offered a small smile. But that investigation report Miss Sue just presented, wasn't that also compiled without my consent? You used a report never confirmed by the person it concerned to question my identity. So I'll use your own logic to question your motives. That's only fair, isn't it? Yvonne's face went white as a block of tofu just pulled from the refrigerator. She stared at me, her eyes churning with fury, humiliation, and a complex emotion I couldn't quite read. Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles blanching, yet her lips still stubbornly maintained the curve of a smile. That smile reminded me again of the mottled snake, except this time someone had stepped on its tail. The conference room door suddenly swung open from the outside. Everyone turned, and in the same instant, everyone's breath stopped. Adrian Cole stood in the doorway. He wore a dark grey trench coat, his hair slightly disheveled from the wind, one button of his shirt collar undone, looking like he'd rushed back from somewhere in a hurry. His gaze swept across the entire room, over the investigation report still lingering on the projection screen, over Yvonne's chalk-white face, over Mina's awkward expression, and finally settled on me. He looked at me for 2 full seconds, confirming I was unharmed, and then a barely perceptible curve lifted the corner of his mouth. Quite the gathering, he said, strolling in with unhurried steps, his tone as casual as if he were window shopping. I've been gone half a day, and you've held such a fascinating meeting. Why didn't anyone think to notify me? No one answered. Yvonne's lips moved, as if she wanted to say something, but when Adrian's gaze swept over her, she swallowed the words back down. Adrian walked to the front of the conference room, glanced at the investigation report still displayed on the screen, picked up the remote, and pressed the power button. The screen rolled up slowly, the projector's fan word to silence, and the only sound left in the room was the fall of his footsteps. He turned to face everyone and spoke. His pace was unhurried, but every word seemed carved with a blade. Regarding Nina's background, I don't need anyone's investigation report. I know her past better than any of you. I have more authority than any of you to say who she is. He paused, his gaze sweeping slowly across the room before coming to rest on Yvonne. Yvonne, the reason you called this meeting was to find out who Nina Chen really is. His voice suddenly turned cold, so cold the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Then let me tell everyone here today, Nina is the woman I'm going to marry. I said this 3 days ago. If anyone didn't hear it clearly then, or pretended not to, then I'll say it again today. He reached out and took my hand without allowing refusal, pulling me to his side. His palm was dry and strong, the warmth radiating through his grip with a certainty that left no room for escape. Nina Chen is the woman I, Adrian Cole, am going to marry. Anyone who dares to touch her is touching me. Have I made myself clear enough? The conference room fell silent as if the air had been sucked out into a vacuum. 30 people, 30 mouths, not a single sound. Yvonne stood frozen in place, the color draining from her face layer by layer until only a pallid gray remained. Her lips trembled, her fingers trembled, but she never let herself collapse. I had to admit, the woman did have a certain backbone, but backbone wasn't the same as decency. She'd handed me a knife, and I'd taken it. Now it was my turn to strike. Miss Sue, I said, stopping at the threshold just as Adrian was about to pull me out of the room. Turning back to look at her, you asked everyone here a question earlier, and I've answered it, but I have a question of my own that I've been wanting to ask you. Yvonne lifted her head to meet my gaze. The hatred in her eyes could no longer be concealed. It seeped out like black fluid leaking through the cracks of a fractured porcelain vase. Your voice that day did something genuinely go wrong with it, or did you make it go wrong yourself? Her pupils contracted violently. That reaction told me I'd guessed right. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned and followed Adrian out of the conference room. The door closed slowly behind us, sealing the murmurs of 30 people and Yvonne's final stifled sob into another world entirely. Adrian led me down the corridor, and neither of us spoke. His hand never let go of mine. The pressure wasn't heavy, but it was like a lock firmly clasped around my wrist. As we passed the front desk, the young woman who'd handed me my ID badge that morning stared wide-eyed, her mouth opening and closing, the pen in her hand dropping onto the desk and bouncing twice without her even noticing. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, the enclosed space held only the two of us. The floor numbers ticked down one by one, red light flickering across his profile in alternating patterns of light and shadow. Why are you back? I spoke first. Weren't you supposed to arrive tomorrow night? Mina called me. His voice was flat, but I could hear what lay beneath that flatness, like red-hot iron doused with cold water, calm on the surface while steam hissed and churned underneath. She said Yvonne had convened a special meeting about you, with 30 people in attendance. So you changed your flight and came back. He didn't answer that question. Instead, he turned to look at me, his gaze holding something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, not concern. Something deeper, a look like he was reconfirming something. When she said you'd faked your credentials, were you scared? No. When she said even your name was fake, were you scared? No. He laughed suddenly, a soft, brief sound, like a leaf blown down by the wind that was swept up again the moment it touched the ground. Then what would make you scared? I thought about it seriously, then answered, probably only if I saw your Maybach parked at the main entrance for more than 3 minutes without security towing it away. He froze for a moment, then genuinely laughed, not the restrained smile he usually wore, the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, but a full laugh that relaxed his brow and melted even the thin layer of ice at the bottom of his eyes. It was the first time I'd seen him laugh like that since I'd known him. Nina, he said, the laughter fading as he looked into my eyes, his tone suddenly turning serious. Have you ever wondered why I insisted on announcing I'd marry you in front of everyone in that conference room? Because you're Adrian Cole, no one can stop you from doing what you want. No, he shook his head, because that day on the streets of Paris, when you stopped that thief for the old lady, do you know what I was thinking? What? I was thinking, this woman, I absolutely cannot let her get away. The elevator reached the basement level, and the doors opened. He didn't lead me toward the parking garage. Instead, he turned toward a door beside the elevator bank. It was a small reception room, normally used to host drivers and accompanying staff, empty at this hour. He pushed the door open, gestured for me to enter, then closed it behind us. Nina, he said, leaning against the door panel, backlit as he looked at me, his voice low and clear, I know everything about you. I found out all of it 6 years ago in Paris, who your father was, how your family's company was swallowed up in a setup, why you came back to this country, why you changed your name and went into hiding, all of it, I know." I stood rooted to the spot, feeling my heart stop in that instant. Then he said one sentence that made my heart start beating again, harder and faster than it ever had before. "Your father's case from back then, I've found the key evidence to overturn the verdict." I don't know what expression I wore in those few seconds. All I felt was the world going suddenly quiet, so quiet I could hear the faint hum of current flowing through the fluorescent light above my head. 6 years ago, my father's company had been shorted into the ground during a hostile takeover. His partner had absconded with the funds, and all the blame had been pinned on my father alone. He'd jumped from his 23rd floor office, leaving behind a suicide note with only 4 words, "I am innocent." I was 19 that year, in my first year of university in Paris, preparing for my final exams in the library when I received that transatlantic phone call. I'd spent 6 years earning 2 degrees, working 3 jobs, and finally returned to this city in hiding, concealed beneath a janitor's uniform, waiting for one chance, one piece of evidence that could prove my father's innocence. And now, this man stood before me, telling me in the calmest voice imaginable that he'd found it. When did you start looking into it?" "From the day you disappeared," he said. 6 years ago, you left the Paris police station right after giving your statement, without leaving any contact information. Later, I went back to that bakery looking for you. I went to your school, but you'd already withdrawn, and your roommate said you'd returned to China. I used every resource I had to search for you for 6 years, but you'd vanished without a trace, until 3 months ago, when a name appeared on the Coal Industries Facilities Department's new hire list, Nina Chen. I looked at the ID photo. Even though you dyed your hair and changed your look, I recognized you at a glance. "So I've been working at Coal Industries for 3 months, and you knew the whole time." "I know." His candor left me with nothing to say. "I've been waiting for you to come to me on your own, but you didn't. You were like a real janitor, clocking in and out every day on schedule, wiping down the corridors, washing the carpets, taking out the trash. I even had someone specifically assign you to the corridor near the executive elevator just to create a coincidental encounter, but you never once looked up at me." I recalled that during those 3 months, there were indeed a few times when, as I was wiping the corridor handrails, I felt someone walk past me from behind, their steps slow, as if deliberately dragging their pace, but I never once turned around to look, because at the time I thought, in this building, it was best not to look at things I shouldn't. Until the day of the Falaise negotiation, he continued, "You walked into that meeting room on your own. At that moment, I knew you couldn't hide any longer." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's the evidence?" "In the safe in my office, 3 bank transfer records, a recording of an internal meeting from back then, and a confession written in the partner's own hand, though, of course, that confession took considerable effort on my part to obtain." "Why did you help me?" I looked at him, and my voice finally trembled in a way I couldn't control. "You don't even know me. I watched you for 3 days on the streets of Paris." He stepped forward, closing the last distance between us. "Every morning at 7:30 you left for class, at 3 in the afternoon you went to intern at a small law firm, and at 8 in the evening you returned to that attic of less than 10 square meters. You ate the simplest baguettes, wore old clothes, but you never once showed a hint of weakness in front of anyone. When you stopped that robber for the old lady, facing a man a full head taller than you, your hands were shaking, but your voice wasn't." Jen Ning. At that moment, I knew this woman. I had to have her. He had never spoken to me this much at once. As he spoke, he kept his eyes on mine, those eyes that were usually as cold as a deep pool, but now carried a warmth that was hard to look at directly. "So when you said you wanted to marry me," I heard my own voice, light as a wisp of smoke. "It wasn't impulse. It wasn't because I saved your negotiation, but because I wanted to marry you 6 years ago." He finished my sentence for me, his tone as certain as if he were stating a mathematical theorem. "For 6 years, I've regretted one thing. That day outside the Paris police station, I should have grabbed you, asked your name, asked where you lived, asked if you'd come back to China with me. I didn't. 6 years later, you showed up in my building in a janitor's uniform. Do you think I'd let you go again?" The lights in the reception room were bright enough that I could clearly see my own reflection in his pupils. That reflection looked a little lost, a little dazed, and there was a thin sheen of moisture over it. "What are you crying about?" he said, reaching out to wipe the corner of my eye with his thumb, the motion so gentle, as if afraid of breaking something. "Once the case is overturned, you won't have to hide anymore. be yourself, openly and fully. Your father's matter will be completely resolved within at most another month, and then I marry you." The tone he said this in was exactly the same as when he negotiated contracts, calm, concise, and not open to question. "The process is already underway, legal is preparing the agreements, admin is scheduling, you can make any request you want. I have only one condition." "What condition?" "No more running." He stared into my eyes, speaking each word deliberately. "Jen Ning, whether the case is overturned or not, no matter what others say, no matter what happens in the future, you are not allowed to disappear from my sight again." I didn't answer him. Instead, I reached out and gently took the hand hanging at his side. There were faint veins on the back of his hand, and his palm was slightly cool. The moment I held it, his fingers tightened abruptly, and he turned his hand over to envelop mine completely in his grasp. The corners of his mouth slowly lifted. 3 days later, Lee Yejua had copies of the 3 pieces of evidence delivered to the relevant authorities. A week after that, my father's case officially entered the retrial process. The partner who had fled with the money all those years ago had already been found and taken into custody by Lee Yejua's people. Faced with irrefutable evidence, he confessed to everything, including the deliberate market manipulation, the contract fraud, and the complete plan to frame my father. The day the news spread, everyone in the Lee Corporation building looked at me with entirely new eyes. The rumors about my fake identity vanished overnight, replaced by a different sentiment. So Jen Ning came to Lee Corporation as a janitor to investigate her father's case. That's really something. Only one person made no sound at all. Su Yao resigned. She submitted her resignation on her own initiative, without waiting for Lee Yejua's disciplinary decision. On the day she left, she ran into me in the corridor. She was wearing a beige trench coat, holding a cardboard box in her arms, with no makeup on her face, looking more haggard than ever. As we passed each other, she paused. "The question you asked me that day," she said, her voice hoarse and calm, as if all her emotions had been drained away. "You asked if my voice really had a problem. I'll answer you now, no." I said nothing, quietly waiting for her to finish. "I ate something that caused a mild allergic reaction." The vocal cord swelling was real, but it wasn't an accident. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I thought that if I sabotaged the translation, if I made Lee Yejua lose face at the most important moment, he would realize how important I was. But he didn't even look at me. His eyes were full of you. She shifted the box up a little, looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was gone, replaced only by a hollow exhaustion. "He searched for you for 6 years. Do you know what that means? It means he never once truly looked at another woman. I was so jealous of you, Jen Ning, but I lost too, and I lost without any complaints." With that, she walked away. The sound of her high heels on the marble floor faded into the distance, finally swallowed by the elevator doors at the end of the corridor. I watched her figure disappear behind the metal doors. I felt neither schadenfreude nor pity. I just thought this woman wasn't stupid. She simply used her intelligence in the wrong place. She gambled all her schemes and tactics, but she never understood one thing. Lee Yejua was never someone who could be won over by tactics. A month later, my father's reputation was officially restored. Outside the courthouse, I walked out in a dark blue skirt suit, squinting against the glare of the sun. Lee Yejua was leaning against the car door waiting for me, phone in hand, looking at something. When he heard my footsteps, he looked up, his gaze resting on me for a moment. Then he put his phone away. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" "Back to the office. Isn't today the weekend?" "Yes," he said, opening the car door and stepping aside to make room, a smile curving at the corner of his mouth. That smile I'd seen many times, but that still made my heart race every time. "So the office is empty. Perfect. Perfect for what?" He didn't answer. He just gestured for me to get in. 40 minutes later, I stood in the CEO's office at the top of the Lee Corporation building, watching the city skyline spread out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows under the afternoon sun. I had been in this office countless times, as an accompanying interpreter, as a meeting participant, as the future boss lady in Lee Yejua's words, but today was the weekend. Apart from security, no one else was in the entire building. The vast top floor was as quiet as an island suspended in the sky. Lee Yejua stood behind the desk and took out a dark blue velvet box from a drawer. He didn't open it, he just placed it on the desk, then raised his eyes to look at me. "Jen Ning, 6 years ago in Paris, when you stopped that robber for the old lady, you were holding a baguette. You hit the robber on the head with it. The bread broke, and the robber was stunned for 2 seconds. His voice suddenly became very, very soft, as if he were telling a story he had treasured for a long, long time. In those 2 seconds, I rushed across the street. When you turned to look at me, your eyes were full of wariness, like a cat ready to bolt at any moment. I remembered that scene, when the man in the black mask rushed over. I really did think he was an accomplice of the robber. It wasn't until he executed a clean takedown and pinned the robber to the ground that I realized I had encountered a passerby who knew martial arts. You said one thing to me then, Lee Yejua said, walking around the desk to stand in front of me. You said, "Thank you, your martial arts are excellent," and then you turned and walked away. I thought you were gone for good, that you'd never reappear in my life. But the next day, I went back to that bakery and saw you again. The 3rd day too. On the 4th day, you disappeared. From that day on, I've been searching for you. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a ring, minimalist in design to the extreme, with no unnecessary ornamentation except for a tiny line of text engraved on the inside of the platinum band. I leaned in to look and found it was a sentence in French. Ne disparaît plus jamais. Never disappear again. During these 6 years, I bought this ring, he said, taking it out of the box and holding it in his palm. I told myself that if I ever truly found you, I would never let you run again. I wouldn't make the same mistake, wouldn't leave you any room to retreat. So today, he knelt down on one knee in front of me. Lee Yejua, the head of the Lee Corporation, the man who made the entire business world tremble at his name, was now kneeling on one knee before me, holding up a ring engraved with French, and the certainty and resolve in his eyes were no different from those he brought to any negotiation. Nina, he said, his voice low, but every word sounded as if it had been pulled from the very depths of his chest. The case has been overturned, your father's name has been cleared, everything you set out to do, you've done. Now it's my turn to ask you a question. He lifted his chin slightly, and the afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, layering a warm, golden halo around his silhouette. Will you marry me? I looked into his eyes, the same eyes I'd first seen in the Paris rain 6 years ago, the same eyes I'd met again in that conference room 3 months back, the same eyes that, every single day since, had made me want to both run toward and run away from. And in that moment, every answer I'd ever rehearsed, every wall I'd ever built, every excuse I'd ever clung to, it all collapsed into something startlingly simple. One condition, I said, name it. No more having me followed. He blinked, then he laughed. The sound rolled through the empty penthouse office, bounced off the glass, came back, hit the ceiling, and echoed again, as if it were trying to make up for every laugh we'd missed over the past 6 years in a single, unguarded burst. Deal, he said, and then he slid the ring onto my finger. The platinum band was cool against my skin at first, a faint chill that melted into my own warmth within seconds, until I couldn't tell where the metal ended and I began. He rose to his feet and pulled me into his arms, my ear pressed against his chest, and through the fine cotton of his shirt, I could hear his heartbeat, steady, strong, one beat after another, gradually falling into sync with my own. 2 melodies that had been running on their own for far too long, finally finding each other's rhythm. Beyond the window, the city stretched out quietly in the golden afternoon light, like a painting that had just been given its final coat of color. I didn't know what the future held, but right now, in this man's arms, listening to his heartbeat, I knew one thing for certain: I didn't have to hide anymore. And that was the end of the story. Did you enjoy today's tale? Which character was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to hear more wonderful stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Every like and subscription is the greatest encouragement for us to keep telling stories. Story Cottage brings you new surprises every day. See you in the next episode.